Hi everybody, Rob Tapper here, University of Montana. I'm excited to bring you a session today on finding quality jazz literature. I hope it helps, so let's get started. The first consideration we want to be dealing with is our grade level. Where the band is when you walk in for the first rehearsal of the year, and ultimately where you want that band to be, or you think that band should be by the end of the year. Instrumentation is also a big consideration. Trumpet ranges, you might find the chart you really think is great, swinging, feels good, but you look at the trumpet ranges and they aren't suited for the level of instrumentation that you have or instrument you have. Trombone ranges are also important. Sometimes the trombone ranges, especially on the lower end, if you don't have the equipment, if the kids don't have the equipment to play lower parts, bass trombones with the right instrument, then that can be a problem as well, as I've seen and heard. Saxophones doubling, you want to make sure that there are parts. If the chart is written for perhaps flute or clarinet, you want to make sure that you've got some parts that are in place of those that are for alto saxophone and or tenor saxophone, bass clarinet, bari saxophone. A lot of times publishers now and arrangers, composers will write alternate parts so that you can make those charts accessible to your band. There's also a lot of convertibles and flexible instrumentation available. What are you trying to accomplish with your jazz ensemble throughout the year or the semester or for this specific concert? Styles, that's a big one. I want to deal with an array of styles: swing, shuffle, funk, bossa nova, etc., etc. Tough, very challenging to deal with, but well worth it. Forms of charts, you want to deal with blues, you want to deal with AABA, things that are going to make drummers really good musicians. Also standard literature, standard big band literature, charts through the ages, things that have been popular that you feel are important to the curriculum. Improvisation sections and chord changes. All too often we have got great charts that the improvisation section is way too complicated for the level of chart we have and or chord changes. So finding ways to simplify that.
Now the fun stuff. We've talked about some general considerations. Now we get to the real meat and potatoes, or in today's world, the kale and potatoes. Concept foundation. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to build? What are we trying to learn? What are we trying to experience? What are we trying to have these kids be able to do, hear, feel, sound like throughout the course of the year? And that is our concept list, our concepts and our foundations. Develop a list of, can be anywhere from 30 to 50 to 75 different concepts, probably more toward the upper end of that you're trying to get across with your student ensembles and musicians. For instance, the concept of form, trying to get everybody in the ensemble understanding how to feel and hear a 12-bar blues. That includes the question, answer 4-bar phrases. That includes a drummer being able to hear the 11th bar, 3, 4, 12, 2, 3, going back to the top. Legato style, another concept. Getting everybody to be able to play legato. Jazz essentially is a legato style. Getting everybody to understand that. Now you say to yourself, this should be very similar to what you're doing also in your concert groups as well. The difference would be style. So then articulations, the dot articulation that occurs mainly in jazz, doesn't happen as much in our symphonic orchestral literature, and other articulations, and how they would, a dot in Percy Grainger, a dot in Eric Whitacre is going to be different than a dot in Count Basie. Staccato, separated. Breathing in time, another concept. Being able to play something that starts on a downbeat, being able to play something that starts on an upbeat, and understanding that everything involves rhythm and time. The subdivision that goes along with that. Being able to subdivide eighth notes, triplets, 16th notes, whatever level you are at currently, what they should be able to do and hear and feel as they're working and playing music. Styles, being able to hear and feel different styles. That's important for the horns. It's very important for the rhythm section. Very challenging to work on, but the results are amazing. And a young drummer that understands styles early on and some basic grooves, a pianist being able to comp on a swing tune versus comping on a bossa nova. Those are extremely important concepts. The comping rhythms that go along with that, another concept. Voicings, that concept in itself. Rootless voicings, closed voicings, open voicings, two-hand voicings, ensembles, being able to spell chords and arpeggiations, how to build thirds, how to get triads, how to get sevenths on top of that, the difference between a major seven and a dominant seven. Those are things that we can work on the same way we work on scales in concert band in our symphonic literature. There are so many different concepts we can target over the course of a year for every level that we're working with. And sometimes if we have one high school jazz band and we're dealing with 4 different grades, those concepts need to be morphed together to make sure that everybody can do those same concepts. But it's really important that the musicians are playing music that they understand, they can feel, they can count, they can listen, as opposed to more rote teaching, which is also an important element to what we do. But we want to make sure that the students are feeling successful, that they own the music more than just monkey see, monkey do. So develop your concept foundation list, and then you can build everything we talk about from here on out. You can build your literature and what you want to play and how you want to play it based off of all the concepts you want to accomplish in your academic year.
Let's start with the rhythm section. Really important for young players having to deal with the concepts involved with the rhythm section. Let's start with piano. Written out lines versus chord symbols. Does the pianist know how to read very well, how they're taking piano lessons? Do they know how to build chords? Huge part of what we're trying to figure out and make sure we establish a baseline and approach for them to understand how to spell those chords. Another consideration is in the chart. If you see an F minor 7 earlier in the chart, is it voiced a certain way, a 3 or 4 note voicing, versus later in the chart, is it voiced differently? If they've got too much information, they're not going to be successful, especially the younger players. Guitars, same exact way. Written figures. Really, we make lots of jokes about guitars, but the truth is, if we've got lots of written figures and the guitarist is pretty much a jam band guitarist you have, it's going to take them a long time and it could be frustrating. So you need to make sure that you're dealing with them one-on-one, which takes a lot of time on our side as an educator, but it's really important. Also, is there tab? Sometimes publishers nowadays will include a sheet of tab for the guitar player. That's helpful. And then written out symbols, chord symbols versus voiced out chord symbols, which for guitarists can really be murder and really be tough. When we get to a bass, same thing, written lines. We want to make sure that when we're looking through these charts, that the bass lines are simple and consistent. We want to make sure that if we've got, again, we go to F minor, we've got one way to play that's going to be successful for them, versus every time there's an F minor chord in the chart, that there's 3 or 4 different ways to do that. We want to develop concepts and simplicity so that they can build upon those strategies when they're playing bass lines. So they understand when they play a bass line that they see F minor and they can play something like that, as opposed to jumping around in these angular lines that sometimes you see in these big band charts. Chord symbols. Does a young bass player understand a chord symbol versus seeing that F minor? And also, do the charts include both the bass line and the chord symbols? Really important. The shapes. Some of the bass players don't have the technique to jump around to get through the range of the bass, so making sure those shapes stay consistent and also within a certain range is really important. Drum set. Of course, we've all heard the adage, when you've got a drummer, if you've got a really good drummer and a very average horn section, the band can sound good. When you've got a really good horn section and the drummer is not grooving and getting in the way, the band can sound really bad and feel bad. So we want to make sure that the parts are written well. You might need to rewrite some parts, you might need to take the music away from them, have them write a sketch of the chart, listen to the chart. We'll talk about recordings in a moment, but make sure that we've got a sketch of the chart, they're listening so they know which sections are playing what, because most of the time the parts are overwritten. They're too complicated, and a young drummer is just going to get really caught up with their head in the stand and not be able to open their ears and just groove. Make sure you've got text in the parts, and you can even put this in yourself. text in the parts that identify sections of the charts, who's playing melodies, if there's solis and or solos, background figures, what instruments are playing those background figures. Really important for the drummer to be successful. The more information they have, this sounds kind of like a paradox, but the more information they have that helps them simplify the chart will help them groove better and make your ensemble sound a lot better.
Some ideas and thoughts. Concert themes. There are a number of different ways you can go about this, but this helps in your planning stages throughout the year of what you want to get accomplished with your jazz ensemble. One great theme would be standards. Trying to find a jazz standard like All of Me or Take the A Train, and there are so many quality arrangements of that out there. Notable and accessible composers and arrangers. You could focus a whole concert on arrangers like Mark Taylor or Mike Kamouf, Greg Skeffington. A lot of great composers and arrangers out there that are writing music specifically for the level where your kids are at this moment. The music of famous big bands, the music performed by Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Woody Herman, etc. And again, there are so many different arrangers and arrangements out there that you could play of that music. And it's really important to the history of what we're doing in big bands. Important jazz artists, jazz icons, Sonny Rollins, John Coltrane, Miles Davis. The music, not just the music that they wrote, but the music that they performed with some other people in their ensembles. So it's a wide array of music out there that you could focus on, a whole concert of jazz artists. The music of Sonny Rollins, think about that concert. There's such great arrangements and great tunes. Improvisation for all, making sure that you're working on charts where every kid in the band can play. Every young musician can take a solo. Some of that involves soloing within the confines of a form, of a tune, but also working on some freer sections of music so they can do some interacting where they don't have as many rules and not as many handcuffs, where they can be a little freer with what they do so there's not as many harmonic, melodic potholes that they step in. There'll be a lot of young players that this will be a wonderful, wonderful pathway for them to enter into the world of improvisation. Commission projects, such a phenomenal way to get your kids involved with the process. There are a ton of phenomenal arrangers and composers out there in whatever region we are that would love to play and write music for your band, and they don't need to be charging a ton of money to make it happen. And that arranger could come to your school. You could do it via Zoom, meet with the kids via Zoom. It happens all the time. If it's a long distance away, the strengths and weaknesses of your group can be explained to that composer and arranger. And it's such a phenomenal way to get the kids involved in the process. Play a blues on every concert. It's such a vital part of the genre that it really should be included in some way, shape, or form in every concert. There are so many great arrangements of blues tunes out there that help you work on phrasing, the 4-bar phrasing of a blues, the question, answer, the style, being able to play a riff and make it feel good. So the scales and the blues scale, minor pentatonic scales and sounds that kids can play and feel successful right away. Air training that is involved with that. Rhythm section comping, the strength of rhythm section comping with some solid voicings, bass lines, and drum set groove. And this is also important in terms of segueing into head charts. Doing the same kind of work with head charts, making sure that the kids are learning the melodies. You're playing them for them, call and response, without reading music. Using their ears, using their heart and soul, and playing is such a great way that music can never be taken from them. Most of the time, head charts, at least starting off, are based on blues heads and simple tunes. If you get out of the blues realm, you can work on simple tunes like impressions, where there's a lot of repetition in what they're doing, and a lot of recordings out there as well to get that information. The big quote I love is ears before eyes. It's so important. I didn't grow up that way. I wish I had, and I think as I work with young musicians, middle school and high school, even college, I do a tremendous amount of just copying riffs, getting to play riffs and hear and feel that music. It'll help the ensemble playing of things that are written big time. It'll help the security of the rhythm section while they're playing, being able to play in a strong rhythmic fashion, so everything feels really good. Another concert theme, instrumentation, making sure that you've got the right music for the group you have, not the group that you want to have. The funny story, I did a jazz festival recently, and there was a big band that played this chart, and I'm listening to it, and I finally figured out after about 45 seconds that it was a trombone section feature, and this group had one trombone. So we want to make sure that we're picking music for the group that we have, and sometimes that takes a lot of editing. Sometimes that takes just figuring out how to make it happen, maybe rewriting things yourself. This happens with trumpet parts and trumpet ranges. But there are so many publishers out there and websites right now where you can find music specifically for your ensemble that will ensure success.
More thoughts and ideas. Features. A great way to feature a young musician, but make sure that the necessity of that and the level are both equitable. It can be an incredible experience for a young musician and create a lot of confidence, but it can also backfire if it's beyond the level of the musician. We want to make sure that that feature is driven by the conceptual importance of what we want to be doing with the ensemble and that musician versus driven by our own desire to play something we really feel like we want to be playing. Rhythms, super important. We hear a chart, oftentimes it's the funk chart, the arrangement of Earth, Wind, and Fire tunes, etc., etc. We want to make sure that this falls under what we previously just talked about in concepts. If the students aren't at a level of reading that rhythm and you're having to teach that rhythm by rote and or sing it to them 100 times for them to understand it, there is value in that. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely value, but I think we want to stick to making sure that the rhythm that they can play and the rhythm that you have on the page and they can read and sight read are as close as possible. We don't want to have them be working on 8-note subdivision and you've got some really tricky figure that they can play and they may like, but they may not really be able to read it for years to come. And I mentioned earlier commissions. There are so many composers and arrangers that would love to write some quality music for your ensemble, and having students perform their music specifically for them is a very powerful tool. And I mentioned a whole bunch of aspects of that I think that are really great to do. So it can provide ownership to the program, and it's well worth checking out. All right, now we get to the big jazz elephant in the room, improvisation. Improvisation is an incredibly vital part of the process in the music we play. We should strive to get our student musicians to feel confident and successful, even if improvisation isn't something that we are comfortable or have a lot of experience doing. Improvisation can, and I think should, be a very sequential learning process that everybody can be successful doing. Just like when you're working in concert band on creating scales with simple patterns, things that are in warm-up books, thirds, triads, whatever it may be, you can do the same thing with improvisation. The difference is in the style, in the way you play it, but all the information is the same. And I don't think you need to feel like you need hours and hours. You don't need to have a jazz degree. You don't need to have hours of improvisation lessons, whatever improvisation lessons may be to you. But you can be successful just going about some pretty simple steps, especially with your young improvisers. There's a lot we can do with these young players that can make them sound and feel really good pretty fast. So when you're choosing your literature, the concept of what's the level of chord change. Sometimes these very easy grade 2 charts, all of a sudden you get to the chord changes part and it goes nuts. Instead of just having simple D minor 7s, D minor 7 flat 5, instead of having a G7, it's G7 sharp 9, sharp 5. That's really tough for a young improviser to feel good about. So looking through the chord changes, also not only looking through it, but if you're not comfortable, finding someone in your area that knows a lot about it that might be able to take those chord changes and tweak them slightly so that they will then be easier and easier to manipulate and be able to maneuver through for a young improviser. When we're dealing with tunes that we're working on, common forms, AABA, blues, repetitive chord sections. I'm a big advocate for if there's a great chart that's at the right level, everything works, it's beautiful, taking the set of chord changes, which may be way more difficult, and simplifying them. Instead of having a 32 bar solo form in a chart for grade 2 or grade 3, condensing that down so maybe it's a 4 bar solo form and it's just repeated, and you can add backgrounds. Make sure that you're dealing with the appropriate number of chord changes. A modal tune dealing with 1 or 2 chord changes that may be a half a step apart versus a tune, a bebop tune that's got chord changes every 2 beats. And again, there's ways to simplify the complex. And then you making sure that you know some basic information about chords and scales and their relationship. I'm a big advocate, again, instead of having a young improviser trying to play an entire scale, that can be really tricky. I like to work on simple patterns: 1, 2, 3, 5, 5, 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3. Simple patterns that, if rhythmically manipulated, can make the young improviser sound really good, really fast.
Now we come to recordings. If you remember when you were in middle school or high school or college and a friend or a mentor played a recording that really changed your life, the value in that. And we have to realize that when we tell young musicians to listen to music, they're not going to listen to it the same way that we listen to it or that you listen to it. And having them by your side in that process is such a great thing. And in this day and age, there's absolutely no reason why you can't have access to either video or audio of literally almost everything that you're playing and performing. So, step 1, take the time to listen by yourself as an educator from that standpoint to prepare the music. And that seems simple, but we don't always do it, and we don't do it perhaps as much as we should do it. There are publisher recordings out there all over the place. Don't be shy. If you can't find a recording on the publisher's website, or even perhaps even on the composer arranger website, don't be shy. Contact a friend or a colleague, or even get in touch with the composer arranger and see if they've got something. They might even have some recording they did with some middle school band in Oklahoma that is at least a great reference point for you to pass along that information to your ensemble. If you can't find that specific arrangement, use what you have. Any example, if you're dealing with style or form or articulations, or even the melody of a tune, any of those, having some kind of example of those tunes is going to be worthwhile as opposed to nothing at all. Group listening. Young musicians won't do it on your own. You tell them to listen, they're not going to do it on their own. And if they do it on their own, they're not going to do it the same way that if you're sitting next to them and pointing things out. And don't minimize the value of when you're excited about something, they see that, they feel that. I went on a trip to California with the jazz band a few years back, and one of my favorite recordings is the Buddy Rich Love for Sale, the Pete Myers arrangement. And I was in the van, driving the van with one of the drummers. And he's a great young man, but not really incredibly ambitious. And he hadn't really checked out Buddy Rich all that much. So we're sitting in the van and I'm playing that recording. And all I did is I just repeated that recording, because we were, as we were driving, we were all designated certain vans. So this young musician was in the van the whole time with me. We must have listened to Love for Sale, I bet 50, 60 times. And finally, by the time we got to the end of our trip, he kept wanting to hear it. So don't minimize your passion and how much influence that has on the young musicians you're working with. 10 minutes in a rehearsal of listening is going to be gold. And not to demean what I can do as a teacher, but 10 minutes of listening is going to have more impact than me rehearsing 10 minutes of any specific phrase or articulation or rhythm section or whatever it may be. That 10 minutes a day, if you've got 40 minutes or 45 minutes, that percentage is going to make a big deal, and it's going to get in their ears. And once it gets in their ears, no one can take that away. So use the recordings. Even if you don't feel comfortable with the recording, if you're not familiar with the recording, use the recordings, listen back, and you're actually going to have some kids pointing some things out to you and other people in the ensemble, and that's going to be a great thing.
I've included with this session, with the video, PDF list of about 50 big band charts that I recommend, that I've heard at festivals over the years, that I think are great to check out from a number of arrangers and composers. Also, I've included a list of accessible composers and arrangers, a list of about 21 folks, jazz publishers with their links to their websites, as well as a couple of jazz distributors. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or phone or text anytime. Love to hear from you. I hope our session, Finding Quality Jazz Literature, is helpful. Please, good luck with everything you're doing with your jazz bands. Hope to see you next time. Looking forward to it.